The fire could be seen for miles. Flames rose above the ancient city like a signal to heaven itself, bright, violent, unstoppable. Inside the sacred halls of the greatest temple the ancient world had ever seen, soldiers smashed golden altars with iron hammers. Priests screamed prayers into the smoke. Sacred treasures that had once been lifted only by holy hands were ripped from their resting places and thrown into rough sacks. The soldiers laughed as they worked. Golden bowls, silver basins, sacred cups used to honor God. To them, they were just spoils of war. Outside the temple walls, a great empire waited. An empire that believed no god could stand before its power. At the head of that empire stood a king whose name would echo through history like thunder. A conqueror feared across the ancient world. A ruler who believed destiny itself had chosen him. His name was Nebuchadnezzar II. And on this terrible day in 586 BC, his army would do something once thought impossible. They would destroy the holy city of Jerusalem. They would burn the legendary Solomon's temple, and they would carry the treasures of God away to Babylon. But how did this happen? How did the most sacred place in the ancient Hebrew world fall to a foreign empire? To understand the destruction of the temple, we must first travel back to a time when its golden walls shone like sunlight over Jerusalem. Nearly for centuries before the temple burned, a different king ruled Jerusalem. A king remembered for wisdom, wealth, and divine favor. His name was Solomon. Under his reign, Israel reached a level of prosperity and power that stunned the ancient world. Trade routes flowed through the kingdom. Merchants brought ivory, gold, spices, and precious stones from distant lands. Foreign rulers came to witness Solomon's wisdom. But his greatest achievement rose upon a hill overlooking Jerusalem. A structure built not merely for royalty, but for God himself. The construction took 7 years. Massive stones were cut and transported from distant quarries. Cedar wood arrived from the forests of Lebanon. Craftsmen carved angels, palm trees, and sacred designs into the walls. Inside the temple, everything gleamed. Gold covered the floors, the doors, and even the walls. At the center stood the most sacred chamber, the Holy of Holies. Within it rested the most powerful religious symbol of the ancient Hebrew world, the Ark of the Covenant. According to tradition, this sacred chest contained the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments given to Moses. To the people of Israel, the temple was not just a building. It was the dwelling place of God, the heart of their identity, the center of their faith. And for centuries, the temple stood as a symbol of divine protection. But beyond the mountains and deserts surrounding Jerusalem, a new power was rising. A power that would change the destiny of nations. In the fertile lands between the great rivers of Mesopotamia, a mighty empire began to awaken. The city at its heart was Babylon. Babylon was already ancient by the time Nebuchadnezzar was born. Its walls stretched across the plains like a fortress of stone and brick. Its temples towered toward the sky. But under the rule of Nabopolassar, Babylon began its transformation into the most powerful empire of its age. Nabopolassar had one goal: destroy the mighty Assyrian Empire that had dominated the region for centuries. And beside him stood his most valuable weapon, his son, Prince Nebuchadnezzar. From an early age, Nebuchadnezzar proved himself a brilliant military commander. He studied warfare, strategy, and siege tactics. He learned how empires were built and how they were destroyed. In 612 BC, Babylonian armies joined forces with allies and launched a devastating attack on the Assyrian capital of Nineveh. The battle was catastrophic. The once invincible Assyrian Empire collapsed in flames. Babylon emerged from the ashes as the dominant power of the ancient Near East. But a new rival now stood in its path, Egypt. In 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar led Babylonian forces to confront the Egyptian army at the famous Battle of Carchemish. The clash changed history. Nebuchadnezzar crushed the Egyptian forces, securing Babylon's control over the entire region of the Levant, including the Kingdom of Judah. Jerusalem was now under Babylonian shadow. At first, the Kingdom of Judah accepted Babylonian rule, but peace would not last. The Kingdom of Judah was small compared to the massive empire of Babylon. Yet its rulers made a dangerous decision. They rebelled. Jerusalem believed that powerful allies, especially Egypt, might help them escape Babylonian domination. But rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar was a grave mistake. The Babylonian king had built his empire through absolute control. Any rebellion had to be crushed completely. In 597 BC, Babylonian forces marched toward Jerusalem. The city's walls trembled under siege. Eventually, the rulers of Judah surrendered. Nebuchadnezzar responded with calculated punishment. He removed the king of Judah Jehoiachin and deported thousands of elites, craftsmen, and warriors to Babylon. Among the captives was a young nobleman who would later become famous in biblical tradition, Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar placed a new king on Judah's throne, a man named Zedekiah. Zedekiah ruled as a Babylonian puppet. His task was simple: remain loyal, pay tribute, keep the peace. But inside Jerusalem, voices began whispering rebellion once more. Prophets warned that Babylon's rule would bring destruction if challenged. One of the most famous voices was the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah delivered a terrifying warning. If Judah resisted Babylon again, Jerusalem would fall. The temple itself would be destroyed. Few people believed him. After all, the temple was God's house. Surely God would protect it. But in 589 BC, King Zedekiah made a fateful choice. He rebelled. Nebuchadnezzar's response was swift. Babylonian armies marched toward Jerusalem once again. But this time, they came to end the rebellion forever. The siege began in 588 BC. Babylonian soldiers surrounded the city. No food entered. No supplies arrived. Jerusalem slowly began to starve. Inside the walls, fear spread through the streets. Families rationed their last pieces of bread. Water grew scarce. Disease followed hunger. The siege lasted nearly 2 years. For the people of Jerusalem, every day became a battle for survival. Meanwhile, Babylonian engineers prepared their final assault. Siege towers were built. Battering rams were assembled. The walls that had protected Jerusalem for centuries would soon face the full power of Babylon's war machine. Then, finally, the moment arrived. Babylonian forces breached the walls. The city erupted into chaos. Soldiers stormed through the streets. Fires spread from building to building. The defenders of Jerusalem fought desperately, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. King Zedekiah tried to escape under the cover of night, but Babylonian forces captured him near the plains of Jericho. Nebuchadnezzar ordered a brutal punishment. Zedekiah was forced to watch the execution of his own sons. Then his eyes were put out. Blinded and chained, the last king of Judah was taken to Babylon. But the greatest tragedy was yet to come: the destruction of the temple. Babylonian troops marched toward the sacred hill of Jerusalem. At its summit stood the magnificent Temple of Solomon. For centuries, priests had performed rituals there. Sacrifices had been offered. Prayers had risen into the sky. Now the temple faced an army that believed no god could protect it. The Babylonian commander Nebuzaradan led the assault. His orders were clear: destroy the city, take its treasures, break its power forever. Soldiers forced open the temple gates. Inside, they found unimaginable wealth: golden lampstands, sacred vessels, silver basins, bronze pillars taller than men. The soldiers tore them down piece by piece. Some treasures were smashed apart to make transportation easier. Others were carried away intact. The massive bronze pillars known as Jachin and Boaz were broken into sections. The giant bronze basin called the sea was dismantled. Everything valuable was taken. Then came the final command: not burn it. Flames spread across the temple complex. Wooden beams crackled and collapsed. Golden decorations melted in the intense heat. Smoke poured into the sky. The Temple of Solomon, one of the most magnificent structures of the ancient world, was reduced to ashes. Jerusalem itself soon followed. Palaces burned. Walls collapsed. Homes were destroyed. The city that had stood for centuries was left in ruins. With Jerusalem destroyed, Nebuchadnezzar completed his final act of conquest. Thousands of survivors were taken into exile. Families were forced to march across the desert to Babylon. This event would become known as the Babylonian exile. For the people of Judah, it felt like the end of their world. Their city was gone, their temple destroyed, their king humiliated, and their sacred treasures now sat in the temples and palaces of Babylon. To many, it seemed as though their God had abandoned them. But even in exile, the Jewish people preserved their traditions, their stories, their faith. In Babylon, prophets and scribes began recording their history more carefully than ever before. The loss of the temple forced a transformation. Faith would no longer depend on a single sacred building. It would live in scripture, community, and memory. Ironically, the destruction meant to erase their culture helped strengthen it. Years passed. Empires rose and fell. Babylon itself eventually faced a conqueror greater than Nebuchadnezzar. In 539 BC, the Persian ruler Cyrus the Great captured Babylon without destroying the city. Unlike previous conquerors, Cyrus made a surprising decision. He allowed exiled peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homeland. The descendants of those taken from Jerusalem began a long journey back. Their mission was simple: rebuild the temple. And so, decades after Nebuchadnezzar's army burned Solomon's masterpiece, construction began on a new sanctuary. The Second Temple, though smaller and less magnificent than Solomon's original structure, it restored a sacred center to Jewish life. Yet the memory of the temple's destruction never faded. The fall of Jerusalem became one of the most defining tragedies in Jewish history. It shaped religious thought, prophecy, and identity for centuries. Even today, the story of Nebuchadnezzar's conquest echoes through history. It reminds us how powerful empires can destroy cities, temples, and kingdoms. But it also shows something deeper. Civilizations can be burned, treasure can be stolen, temples can collapse into dust. But faith, memory, and identity can survive even the fall of empires. And in the ruins of Jerusalem, the ashes of Solomon's temple became the foundation for a story that would endure for thousands of years, a story of destruction, exile, and survival. Join us as we uncover the secrets of the past and explore the untold stories that shaped our world. Subscribe now and ring the bell, because history isn't just in books, it's alive, and it's waiting for you.